Tim Schweikert, I'm the head of GE Transportation for Sub-Sahara South Africa. First off, we see Africa as a tremendous opportunity in terms of our transportation business. And I should qualify, our transportation business is largely rail equipment, specifically locomotives, signaling equipment, services, and we also are into mining. So we do the propulsion systems on large mining trucks as well. So given the current state of railroads in Africa, given that in countries the railroads have been somewhat neglected over the last 20, 30 years, and then that combined with the fact that mining is growing very rapidly in many of the countries across Africa, there is a critical infrastructure need to help quickly modernize railroads, to help with the development of the natural resources in Africa. So as an example, I think our best example is here in South Africa, working with Transnet. About 3 years ago, we developed a partnership with Transnet. We formed a joint venture, GSAT, here in Midrand. And we have been working to serve some of the development projects that Mr. Molefa has just described by localizing locomotive production here in South Africa. We just shipped our 43rd locomotive. We've currently have 143 on order with Transnet. And I'm happy to say that those locomotives are contributing greatly in terms of helping improve the productivity and efficiency of the railway through improved haulageability technology. In other words, the ability to pull longer trains and do that in a more reliable fashion. Our hope is to take the model that we've done here in Africa, South Africa, and take that model and expand it to other countries within Africa. We've recently signed an MOU with Nigeria and also Ghana. We're in discussions with several other countries. Last week I was just in Mozambique, which I was very impressed in terms of their willingness to open up the country to companies such as GE, partnering, bringing companies like GE to partner not only with CFM, the National Railroad, but also with some of the mining operations such as Rio Tinto, who have some large concessions in the Tinto province in Mozambique. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of an overview of our strategy and our near-term or mid-term plans here in Africa. It is a big challenge, and I think Mr. Molefa brought up some very good points in terms of the long-term nature and attracting equity. A couple other things that, from GE's perspective, that we think are critical. 3 points. First is each project, I think, has to have the highest level of sponsorship by the government. I think there's concerns with when the governments transition through elections, will there be a continued commitment to make the investment? But I think to take that down just one more level, we find working with the governments in terms of understanding what the commitment is in terms of their policies and moving freight back off the roads onto rail, which is important from not only from a productivity standpoint to help support the 6% growth, but it's also important from a safety standpoint and from a quality of life standpoint as well. What the government is doing in terms of developing agreements towards that end, in terms of working, whether it be with mining companies, forestry companies, to assure that there is that revenue base that's going to be there if the investment is made. Because at the end of the day, what you want to see as investors is a strong business plan, and it's that revenue base that is going to be one of the first things that investors will look at. The second area that we think is critical to that business plan is the whole element of supply chain. Many of the countries want to localize like we've done here in Transnet, and we have to balance. Investors look at how do you balance the demands of localization with assuring that we're getting cost competitive bidding and assuring that at the end of the day we're going to get good pricing on any equipment that is or services that are localized. And then I'd say that the third element that we see in terms of once the contract is defined and we have brought the investors on board, the execution piece of it, and that one of the things that we are concerned at as we look across the different countries in Africa is the skill base, particularly the technical skill base. We find that there is very good higher education pools of talent, but when it comes to vocational skills, whether it be welders or services technicians, they're often in short supply. And I think that's something that we, companies like GE, need to work with the governments to help put together the right training programs to build those vocational skills here in Africa. But I think if those three elements are addressed, I think the likelihood of finding investors is very good. When it comes to rail infrastructure, to Mr. Malepa's thoughts, the value of these investments becomes greatly multiplied if they are trans-country. So being able to connect the different economies in the sub-Sahara through rail links greatly enhances the value of those networks and enhances and makes the investments, I think, much more attractive. I think it also does something to address one of the investors' concerns, and that is long-term stability. Typically, when these infrastructure investments transcend the different countries, that helps bring some stability to the project because you're not just dependent on one government or one policy change with government. But so I think those are very important points. But again, back to the earlier points I made, I think investors look at these projects from a business plan sort of standpoint, and they're looking for clarity and commitment starting from the governments. And I should say we deal at kind of two different levels. We're dealing with governments on the state-owned enterprise networks, but we're also working with mining companies, and so we approach those very differently when it comes to investment. Mining companies, much more straightforward. When it comes to working with the national railways, much more complicated and requires a much deeper, what I'll call an engagement plan with the government agencies, with potential investors. The last thing I would say is we do, as an American company, we do leverage our XM Bank as much as we can to help with the financing of American content, even though we do a lot of localization as we are doing here in South Africa. Our XM Bank is very, very supportive of the transportation industry and particularly interested in Africa, and has been very, very, very supportive.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.